So tonight we're talking about, this is the third in a series of talks that Anna Van Hoy and I have been giving on clinging to life, clinging to stories, clinging to our stories of life. And tonight we're going to talk about clinging to our stories of life and how that might impact our relationship with death. So here we go. The Buddha taught that things, if clung to, are suffering or are a source of suffering. So in our earlier talks, we talked a lot about chairs and cookies. Quick recap for those of you who might have missed the chair and cookie talk. We can know what something is without the embellishment of stories. What is a chair? Here's what I know about chairs. They generally have 4 legs. They have a back, or they're called a stool. A chair is for sitting. Some chairs are more comfortable for this body than other chairs are. Some chairs belong in the living room. Some chairs belong in the kitchen around a table. Some chairs are better for offices. Beyond that, I don't really have much to say about chairs. What is a cookie? A cookie is for eating. It is a round, sweet food that is baked. Cookies are delicious. I love cookies. Chocolate chip cookies are my favorites, especially if they have walnuts. And I really, really like them if they have walnuts and oatmeal. And the walnuts are toasted, that makes them even better. Cookies remind me of cozy grandmother's kitchens. Not mine necessarily, but that's how they're supposed to be. Cookies make me feel cozy. If I'm feeling lonely, bored, sad, frustrated, annoyed, indignant, I'll feel better if I have a cookie. I might need 2 or 3 to feel enough better. Can you feel the drift between the definition of my felt experience of a cookie, what we know of a cookie, and what might be my stories of cookies? Can you see where we just slide right in there? And I feel very strongly about all of the things I just said. You may not feel the same way about cookies. But finding the place where experience moves to story is a nice edge for us to learn about, to pay attention to recognize when it's happening. A couple of weeks ago, we did this same exercise with life. What is life? As in, what is my direct experience of life? And here are a few of my answers. Some of you maybe were here and recall yours, but here are some of mine. Life is an organism doing what organisms do. Life is an adventure, a mystery, an addiction, magic, an extraordinary explosion of sensation and appreciation. Well, gosh, maybe some of those are stories too. The next step in this exercise was to answer the question, what stories of life do I cling to? Which showed me that I have stories about my life which are just as much stories about my death as they are about my life. In fact, when asked what stories I cling to about life, without a single blink, all of my answers were shaped entirely by my wish to avoid and my fears about my death. Now, I'm a death doula. Thinking about death, reading about death, talking about death with clients and other doulas, that's how I spend a lot of my awake time. And yet I didn't realize that day to day, I see my life primarily in relationship to my death. Without the looking at it, without that examination, that's been true on a subconscious level. When it becomes conscious, it becomes available for me to learn from, to work with, and to benefit from. The stories I cling to about life can be prompts for questions instead, or also. So what stories of life do I cling to? Here are a few with the questions they invite for further examination. I'll miss those I love when I die. That might be the most painful one. I'll miss those that I love when I die. And the question, who will? Who will do the missing? How, when I am dead, will I do the missing? Here's another one. My life is special and important beyond the survival of this organism. Please define special and important. This may be all there is, and I don't want it to end. I don't have a question about that one. That just seems real. Here's some other stories I have. I have work to do to benefit others. Says who? My finite time is not my own. Is it finite? Whose time is it? One life is not enough. It's all I have. It's mine. Don't take it. Is it mine? Who is the me that owns this life? This gives us a peek at the concept of self versus non-self that the Buddha talked about once or twice. Who is this me? This might be the last one. I have to earn or pay for my existence with actions that serve to benefit others. I have to do enough to be worthy of this life. Whose rule is this? And who's judging what's enough? So those are some of my stories. I have more, but that's enough to give you a taste of my stories. And I don't know if they're anything at all like your stories. But now that I've seen my stories and questioned them, I have a place to start to grapple with my life that's grounded in the reality of my mortality. The reality of it, not the fear of it, not the hidden, I don't want to look over there part of it. I can question the assumptions in the stories that were previously invisible to me. Invisible as long as I didn't see the stories themselves. These questions, of course, invite more questions for me to work with, like this one. What's the impact of those hidden stories on my day-to-day life? What's the impact of those hidden stories on the day-to-day experience that I have of my life? How do those stories prevent me from being present for my life? We mostly cling to ideas and concepts, not things or experiences in and of themselves. Our concepts of cookies, our concepts of life, our concepts of death. These are stories, these are our stories. Tonight, I propose two really good reasons for our practice. One, if we practice learning to see the impermanence of all things as the truth of all conditioned things, that all things that arise in existence will pass from existence, this practice will benefit us at the end of our lives. In this way, we're getting practice in letting go and practice in letting go of our own lives. Teresa Miller spoke a few weeks ago just beautifully about the practice of minding the gap. I think another title for her talk that she offered was Staying Calm, Knowing Change. bringing awareness into the beginnings, endings, and what lies between that gap, the gap between arising and passing, between passing and arising, which we practiced within our meditation. What is the gap between breaths like? What's the gap between the in-breath and the out-breath like? These are also sometimes, these gaps, they're also called bardos. In Buddhism, the bardos are places of transition between one life, and generally speaking, there are several bardos between this life and wherever we end up in the next life. There are a few other bardos we pass through between here and there. So this bardo is the place between lives, between states, between breaths, between thoughts even, the gap. So maybe this is possible, to get good at letting go, to get good enough at letting go that we can be good at letting go of our own lives. Maybe we practice by minding the gap. We learn how to be present to these bardos, these gaps. We learn how to be truly present with things as they are. In our sitting practice, we practice being still, and being still with physical discomfort, with disquieting thoughts, with emotions of all kinds. Staying with, being still, being with, being present with whatever arises, pleasant or unpleasant. So maybe this preparation will allow us to be fully present. So no matter what the circumstances are, we have a sense of presence. We're here for our lives. That's useful day to day. It's very useful. It's practical. And it's real. And it offers us the felt experience of our lives, to be here for them. This is where enjoyment lives. This is where our lives live. So maybe we can learn to be able to be fully present, calm, equanimous, and maybe even enjoy the transition of death. It may be miraculous, beautiful, joyful. We don't know. We can't know. Though there are scores of anecdotal stories of near-death experiences that would support that possibility. You may have read one, two, or hundreds of them. What happens when people die and come back? The second good reason that I propose for our practice is that as we practice with the truth of our own impermanence, practice with the acceptance of our own deaths as unpredictable, impersonal, and inevitable, we're invited into a more intimate relationship with our own lives. Maybe we'll take the opportunity to increasingly cherish this brief human life and live a fuller, more expansive, more authentic, and more deliberate life. Awareness of mortality brings samvega, which is the Pali word for spiritual urgency. Andrew Olendzki describes it this way: this trembling sense of urgency that motivates people and stirs up energy can be triggered by any of the Buddha's teachings. But those pointing toward the fragile and fleeting nature of the human condition are especially effective. Appreciating the gravity of our situation, we recognize the preciousness of our time. Time is short. We may more deeply question, how do I want to live? What is mine to do? Maybe even, what do I need to tend to now so that at the end of my life, I can experience the grace of releasing an examined life thoughtfully lived? There's an Australian death doula named Bronnie Ware who wrote a book called Regrets of the Dying. And there are 5 regrets that her patients, clients expressed over and over and over again. The first one is, I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life that was expected of me. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. It's another. I wish I'd had the courage to express my feelings. I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. And finally, I wish I had let myself be happier. Someone called this a misalignment problem. We have values. We have values we hold dear. We have certain values and ways we want to spend our time, our limited time on this earth. We know this. We have values. We know our time is limited. Yet we wind up spending our time in ways that don't align with those values. Sam Harris, a philosopher and neuroscientist, gave a talk called On Death and the Present Moment, and I'm going to share with you some of this talk. He says, most of us do our best not to think about death, but there's always a part of our mind that knows this cannot go on forever. Part of our mind always knows that we are just a doctor visit away or a phone call away from being starkly reminded of the fact of our own mortality or of those closest to us. This is a paradox, of course, because we all know this epiphany is coming. Don't you know this epiphany is coming? Don't you know that there's going to come a day when you'll be sick or someone close to you will die, and you'll look back on the kinds of things that captured your attention and you'll think, what was I doing? You know this. And yet, if you're like most people, you'll spend most of your time in life tacitly presuming you'll live forever, doing things like watching a bad movie for the 4th time or bickering with your spouse. These things only make sense in light of eternity. And yet there are some costs to coming to terms with one's death, maybe especially when we start this project in middle age and beyond. Very few of us have engaged in creating a relationship with the reality of our mortality. So when as adults, maybe even senior adults, we reach some sort of milestone, maybe it's a big birthday, or both of our parents have now died, and we realize that the row we're marching in has just become the front line. Or this body seems to be playing whack-a-mole with aches and pains and this physical and that physical. Our death becomes a harder subject to avoid thinking about when these things happen. So speaking for myself, these are not developmental tasks I'm particularly enjoying. As a doula, when I went through and still go through different trainings, in doula trainings, we spend a lot of time recalling experiences we've had of loved ones' deaths and contemplating our own deaths. It can be awfully, terribly sad to think about the deaths of people I loved. It has sometimes been even sadder to consider my own. I suppose that might sound callous or self-centered, but I believe it might be because I've had the chance to grieve those deaths. I know how to live through it because I did. I'm still here. And until becoming a doula, I was pretty dedicated to not thinking about my own death, at least in any sort of deliberative, contemplative way. It was too painful. And I will confess that during every doula training I've ever been in, I have cried about those deaths and my own. It's sad. I was with a patient's family last weekend, And one of the members of the family is a 9-year-old boy. And I asked him how he was doing. How are you doing with this? And with his t-shirt, he said, it's just sad. It's sad. I've learned we live through sad. And yet, unexamined, before I really started thinking about my own death, I can't tell you that I knew how I had managed to get along without me. That feels impossible. Cue the stories. This grief for the loss of me is less crushing now, most days. Fears and regrets still arise out of the ether. Questions of, these are in capital letters, meaning and proper use of time have greater importance. And do I think my life is fuller, richer, more expansive? Do I live more authentically because I've grappled with some of these issues, these stories, these questions? Yes, I do. And I have miles to go. The Buddha knew all about this. I think it's actually what he considered, I'm making this up, of course, the graduate school of Buddhist teaching. He taught a lot about impermanence. Here's the graduate school part. You don't last either. That awareness is the reason we struggle with the first 3 noble truths. The first truth, in life there is suffering. The second, there is a cause of suffering. That causes clinging to that which is impermanent. All conditioned things are impermanent. You are a conditioned thing. I am a conditioned thing. Ergo, we are impermanent. There is a cure for suffering. Number 3, stop clinging. Accept things as they are. This is a big job. On a lighter note, to help you along, when you go home, please find Bob Newhart's skit on Stop It. This is how we stop clinging. Stop it. YouTube, Bob Newhart, Stop It. The Buddha had other ideas. There's a path to the end of suffering, and that is the Eightfold Path. And this is how we can deliver ourselves from this suffering of impermanence. We don't last. Gil Fronsdal says, confronting impermanence profoundly in this meditative way can open us to liberation. The final liberative level of impermanence is the movement towards letting go at the deepest level of our psyche. Pema Chodron advises this practice. At any moment, when we notice we are stuck or all tangled up in our thoughts and concepts, just pause. Take 3 mindful breaths. Let this be a contrast to being all caught up. Let it be like popping a bubble. In this way, she says, we're entering the gap, fully being with the gap. She says, pause practice can transform each day of your life. It creates an open doorway to the sacredness of the place in which you find yourself. The vastness, stillness, and magic of the place will dawn upon you if you let your mind relax and drop for just a few breaths the storyline you're working so hard to maintain. If you pause just long enough, you can reconnect with exactly where you are, with the immediacy of your experience. She goes on to say, another powerful way to do pause practice is to simply listen for a moment. Instead of sight being the predominant sense perception, It's a very powerful way to cut through our conventional way of looking at the world. Just listen. In any moment, you can stop and listen intently. It doesn't matter what particular sound you hear. You simply create a gap by listening intently. Let's do this. 30 seconds. Listen. Go. What did you notice? Was it a different experience to hear me talk about listening than it was to listen? My death is certain. The hour of my death is uncertain. This being the case, what do I choose right now? I believe that the best way for us to be fully present for that moment is to be fully present for this one. Can I practice? Can I learn? Can I teach myself the art of release so that at the end of my life, when there is nothing that will save me, nothing I can take with me, can I have practiced enough so that I can go with some grace, some ease? May it be so. Can you practice? Can you learn? Can you teach yourself the art of release so that at the end of your life, when there is nothing that will save you, nothing you can take with you, can you have practiced enough so that you can let go with some grace, some ease? May it be so. Can we do this together? Absolutely. Ajahn Chah once said, if you let go a little, you'll have a little peace. If you let go a lot, you'll have a lot of peace. If you let go completely, you'll have complete peace. This release is sometimes called Mahasukha, the great happiness, which is said to be the only happiness that is ultimately reliable. The happiness that spiritual practice promises is not endless bliss, endless joy, and soaring transcendence. Who would want that in a world where there is so much injustice, so much tragedy, so much unhappiness, illness, and death? To feel the scourge of impermanence and loss, and to appreciate it at the same time profoundly as the beautiful essence of what it means to be at all. This is the deep truth I hear reverberating in the Buddha's last words. Everything vanishes. Practice goes on. That's from Norman Fisher. To feel the scourge of impermanence and loss, and to appreciate it at the same time, profoundly, as the beautiful essence of what it means to be at all. This is the deep truth I hear reverberating in the Buddha's last words. Everything vanishes. Practice goes on. I'm going to leave you with a poem by Red Pine. So you should view this fleeting world, a star at dawn, a bubble in a stream, a flash of lightning in a summer cloud, a flickering lamp, a phantom, and a dream. Thank you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for your practice.